Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your response. I felt like we needed to do some participatory section or something. Everyone seemed very excited. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Robin Anderson, and I'm the Education and Engagement Manager here at the Hobby Center. And this has been a very exciting 2 days for our team to have Dr. Roger Ideishi with us, who's come to do trainings with us in the past. And really his trainings in the past focused for the team that helps support our sensory-friendly or sensory-inclusive productions. But in the past year, the Hobby Center has gone through a strategic plan, and we're really holding ourselves accountable to our new identity of being a connector, a convener, an incubator within the community, and holding to our core value of inclusion and wanting everyone to embrace that. And as Roger will address in his presentation, the touch point of the audience member all the way back to the garage, or even before when they buy their ticket and they're planning their experience before they arrive at the Hobby Center, is really essential. So he has a wonderful insights to share. He's worked with over 120 organizations around the world and is the director of occupational therapy at George Washington University. And yes, you can all be like super entranced by his fancy captioning with his PowerPoint. We were, the Zilka team's like, woohoo, new resource. So without further ado, let's give a round warm welcome to Roger Ideishi.
Great, thank you. Am I good here? Yeah, great. Well, thank you for inviting me to the Hobby Center. I was here in 2019, and I gave a similar presentation, but even during the pandemic in the last number of years, we learned so much more about how we provide inclusive, accessible art to the neurodivergent community. I titled this presentation, "The Diversity in Neurodiversity, Preparing for Sensory Inclusive Experiences." And what I'm gonna talk about are really, as Robin said, touch points to think about. There isn't really a particular thing that you have to do or you must do. It really depends on who the individual is. It depends on the show. It depends on the venue. There's lots of different reflective points that need to be thought of when doing this type of work. So what I'm going to talk about today is what is the human need and why do we do this work? What are some of the underlying foundational knowledge pieces that I think will help you understand interactions and exchanges with the audience? Then I'm going to talk about some common guidelines for sensory inclusive experiences, but they're not a checklist. And I've talked to a lot of people here at the Hobby around how to think about and reflect on these principles, and then to discuss the organizational capacity and readiness for this kind of work. So what is the human need and why do we do this work? So arts are a part of being human, and at the core of my work is relationship building. It's how we connect with others and how we support each other through their journeys in life. And through that relationship building, it's about creating more access and opportunities that lead to a more inclusive society. And when more people are engaged in society in an inclusive way, that then they have the autonomy and the self-determination to choose the life that they want. And for many people in the disability community, they don't get those choices that many other people get. What I hear from many people in the disability community, and particularly the neurodiverse and neurodivergent community, is that when they leave their home, they are under a lot of stress. And part of that is because when they leave their home, they are often ridiculed in society by people they don't know. They are called crazy. They are called mentally ill, whether or not they have an actual mental illness or not. Parents who have children with autism are called bad parents, or their kids are called brats, and people will come up to them in the grocery store and say, why don't you get a hold of your kids? Get control of your kids. What's wrong with your kids? And their kids may just be responding to a situation in a different way, but somehow people in public feel the right to ridicule other people. And because of this stress and ridicule, many people feel that they are on what we would call high alert. They're not sure what's going to happen around the corner. So they're always in this state of worry or anxiousness because they don't know what's going to happen next. Now, if you are under stress, you are being ridiculed, and you weren't sure what was around the corner, what kind of choices would you make in going into the community? Many people will make the choice of staying home. And so there is this self-selection of being isolated because it's easier, it's more comfortable, and they don't have to face this constant stress and ridicule in their life. Even when there is an environment or a place that is welcoming and inviting, like the Hobby Center, the disability community will still say it's not enough. Hobby Center is just one place, right? This needs to happen across all of society in all communities. But those lack of opportunities, those lack of welcoming spaces just don't exist enough. So they can come to the Hobby Center, and that's one point in their life, but the rest of their life is still has all these stress points or challenge points. So even the arts has not been accessible. And here are some quotes from people when they are in those welcoming, inviting spaces that art can be for everybody. This first quote is from a mother of an autistic child, and she said, "I had to show her what I loved about the world." The next two quotes are from autistic adults when they are in inviting, welcoming, supportive environments. And this person says, "I'm relaxed and I'm not on alert." Now we know, just from a medical physiological standpoint, the effects of stress on the body. It impacts cardiovascular risks, it impacts mental health, it impacts many things in our life that can have long-lasting consequences when you're under stress every single day. Another thing that I hear pretty regularly is that when an autistic or neurodivergent individual is in these welcoming, inviting spaces that are supportive, they'll walk away saying, "I get to be who I am." Because most of the time, there's this phenomena that many autistic individuals call masking, that they have to mask who they are because the real person is inside and they can't let it out because the rest of the world will ridicule them, or they have to behave in a way that makes the rest of the world feel comfortable for who they are and how they are. So they never get to be who they are. So when they are in inviting, welcoming spaces, they'll say, "I get to be who I am, and I'm relaxed. I'm not on alert." Now here's a really interesting phenomena with that quote, "I get to be who I am." So as Robin indicated, I've worked with over 120 arts organizations literally around the world. I've been to Tokyo, I've been to Moscow, I've been to Romania, Dublin, London, I've been Brisbane, Australia. I've been around the world supporting and helping arts organizations develop a more inclusive environment. And when we go and talk to the community and we ask them, how does it make you feel that this organization is being supportive and is creating a welcoming space? And the person says, in their native language, whether it's Japanese or Russian, they'll say whatever the phrase is. And the interpreter, or I put it in Google Translate, and guess what comes out? In the exact same quote, that phrase, "I get to be who I am," I've heard it over and over again in Russian and Japanese and Romanian and Chinese, and it just amazes me that the quote literally comes out the same. So this experience of not being who they are is a pretty universal experience for people who are disabled, regardless of what country you come from. So this idea that they don't get to be who they are, just imagine for yourself that you don't get to show your child what you love about the world. Or imagine that when you go out, you're always on alert. Or imagine when you go out into the world that you don't get to be who you are. I think that's pretty powerful, because being authentic and being who you are, I think, is part of the human experience. And if a person can't experience that, that makes me feel really sad. So what can we do? We can promote community engagement. And we know through science and through literature, we know that community engagement has a mediating effect on stress, on mental health, on many physiological factors, whether it's blood pressure or weight or whatever it might be. We know those are mediating effects, that engaging in the community does make a difference. So here are some studies that we know already that the disability community, they have increased rates of isolation, of loneliness, of anxiety. We know that they participate in the community less than other people, and that decreased participation leads to decreased social interaction, and that decrease in social interaction and connectedness means they have less friends. So disabled youth have less friends and less connectedness with other people. Now, when you add other factors in, like race, income, education level, all of those things I just talked about get worse. So if we're going to talk about a young black autistic man, it's worse than other people. The sense of isolation, the sense of not having friends, the depressive symptoms, all that gets worse depending on your race, your education level, or your income level. And the consequences of that means that people with disabilities have less access to other systems in society, whether it's education or healthcare, whether it's in employment. And we know statistically that the disabled community have lower rates of employment, lower rates of education, lower rates of access to healthcare. And it's because of that self-selected isolation. But there is hope, because we know that when a disabled individual is engaged in the community, engaged in activities, and that community has resources and supports, and specifically around physical activity and arts experiences, we know that all those things get better, that that stress goes down, anxiety goes down, loneliness goes down. We also know that it affects physiologically, that muscle endurance gets better, blood pressure is improved, body mass index is better. People have a sense that they belong to something, they belong to a community. And then the National Endowment for Arts has been tracking this for a number of years. And they say that when children and youth participate in arts experiences in childhood or in their youth, when they have regular exposure and participation in arts, that trajectory continues into adulthood. But if they don't have exposure to arts through childhood, then it either flattens out or it goes down. And we know the benefits of arts and physical activity: decreasing stress, increasing endurance, giving a sense of belonging. So we know this works, but we don't have the opportunities. There's the lack of opportunity for disabled youth or disabled adults. So my first takeaway is that this is all about relationships. It's not that you have to do a particular strategy or you have to have this fidget or that thing or that. There's lots of strategies that are out there for sensory-friendly work. But really at the heart of this work, it's about creating relationships. And as volunteers, as house staff, that is probably your number one job, is to create the social environment that someone feels that they belong at the Hobby Center or that they belong to the community of Houston. And more than anything, that is what they are looking for. They're looking for that social connection. Okay, so sometimes people often will ask, well, what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is all of us. We are all neurodiverse because all of our brains work differently than the person sitting next to you. So we all belong to the neurodiverse community. But there are some people within that neurodiversity who have particular preferences and needs that society is not addressing. And that's the group of people that we often refer to as neurodivergent. And that they have particular needs and preferences that society is not supporting or not resources that the society is not providing. So when you hear neurodivergence, that's what we're referring to when we say neurodivergence. And then right in the middle here, with that brown circle in the middle, that's referring to specific diagnoses like autism, attention disorder, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities. And particularly when we are talking about community engagement, it's not about a medical diagnosis. It's about being a part of the community rather than labeling them as autistic, right? It's about belonging and being a part of society, and they just want to belong, they want to connect. And so many people, they might identify as autistic and neurodivergent. Or they might just identify as autistic because that's what's more comfortable for them, and it gives them identity that lets other people know what their needs are. So that is very self-determined. But that's the difference, because you'll hear these terms talked about a lot, particularly in sensory-friendly or in these communities, autistic communities or neurodivergent communities. You'll hear the differences here, but that's what it is. And those identities are self-identified. In the arts industry, for about the last 15, 20 years or so, there has been this phenomena to create more inclusive or accessible spaces in the arts industry. And many of those have been called sensory-friendly, relaxed performances, autism-friendly, sensory mornings in museum spaces, adapted classes, autism classes in arts education. And that's just telling the community that you've created a welcoming, inviting space. But here's the question that I always ask, is why do we have to label it that way? Why can't they just come to a show? Unfortunately, society and the public is not ready for that, right? And until we can get the entire public on board with accepting and supporting everybody, just coming to any show is going to be a little bit of a challenge, right? So that's why we have these particular performances that we might call sensory-friendly or relaxed performances. So access creates opportunity, and many people think access is related to the American with Disabilities Act. The American with Disabilities Act, it's an important law that we have on the books. But I always tell people, the American with Disabilities Act is the baseline floor. Sometimes that floor can be dirty or dusty or empty. So it just gets you in the door, but then what do you do if nothing's there? So I always say this work is about access and inclusion, because inclusion gets to a sense of meaning and a sense of belonging. Access just gets you in the door. So we have to aspire to inclusion, because that is what the community is really needing. They're needing the sense of belonging and connectedness. So here's a couple points that are important to point out. Neurodivergence isn't just autism. Neurodivergence is many different identities, right? Could be intellectual disability, could be learning disorder, could someone with a brain injury, someone with a mental illness, someone with dementia. That neurodivergence means that a person may have particular needs and preferences, right? The labels of autism, dementia, mental illness, those are specific medical diagnoses. And people may or may not want to be labeled that way or identified that way. But a lot of people think neurodivergence means autism, and autism is just one identity within multiple identities that are under neurodivergence. The other thing about sensory-friendly work is that it's primarily been for children and youth. Even I've been doing this work for about 20 years now, it's still predominantly children and youth. And I've been working with children and youth for 20 years. Children grow up. So the 5-year-old that I was working with 20 years ago, they're 25 years old. And I've been doing all this work, even myself, in child and youth, the youth area. And these youth get to 20 and they're just like, they're used to participating in the arts because we know that trajectory continues on, but then they get to 20 and they're like, there's nothing else out there for me, because as an adult, those supports don't exist anymore. The content doesn't exist anymore. They don't want to go to Peter Rabbit anymore. They don't want to go to Sleeping Beauty anymore. They want to go to The Color Purple. They want to go to what might interest them as an adult. But those opportunities are still few and far between. So we need to really think about doing this work across the lifespan and not just for children and youth. And so creating those diverse opportunities are really important to do. Now this next section is really important, and it's the underlying human process for how people might engage in the world. So what are the ways that we gather information about the world? We typically would gather information. We would sense something, right? We would see something, we would smell something, we would touch something. So up here I have an image of a skunk. So, right, what are those sensations? The smells, the vision, it's black, it's white, it's big, it's small, right? We gather all that information. Well, all that information then has to be received. Someone who's blind and deaf does not receive the sensation. And they process that information in a completely different way than what I'm going to refer to in thinking about sensory processing for somebody who is neurodivergent. So someone who is neurodivergent, they have to receive that information, and then they have to perceive it. The brain has to register that information. So the brain has to know that I smell something, I see something, I can feel something. The brain has to register that there's a sensation that is happening. Once the brain registers that, the brain has to interpret what that sensation means. So is it a pleasant smell? Is it an unpleasant smell? Is it something that feels nice to touch or something that doesn't feel nice to touch? So the brain has to interpret that and make that interpretation. And then based on that interpretation and meaning, we will respond. And I am making a presumption that if the sense is the skunk, that many people will run away. Or the person might go, ooh, that's cute. I want to go pet this skunk. Right? There are people out there who may do that, right? Because everybody perceives sensations differently. And here's an example. Everyone perceives and responds differently to the same sensation. So here's an example. It's 45 degrees out. And you just want to put on a sweater, get a blanket, cozy up on the sofa with a hot cup of tea and a book, and just get comfortable. Your partner walks into the room with a light shirt on, and your partner says, I want to open the windows, let the cool air in, feel refreshed. Who's right? Me, I'm right. Right? I'm sure you can resonate with that example, right? Oh, that's spicy? I don't think it's spicy. Who's right? It's essentially the same sensation, but people will perceive it differently. So I refer to that as over-intensity and under-intensity. Some people will experience sensations with more intensity, over-intensity. Some people will experience sensations with less intensity or under-intensity. And that's just part of human variability, with all of us being neurodiverse, because all of our brains work differently. Sound. What if I did the next hour talking like this the entire time? What would you do? Cover your ears, leave the room, ask me to pipe down a bit, or you just like this is stressful. Is he really going to talk that loud for the next hour? And your heart rate goes up, right? So that's over intense sounds. And those responses that you just shared with me, those are responses that we would all make under that condition of a loud sound. We might cover our ears, withdraw from the space. We might tune it out. We might express displeasure or, please, Roger, can you speak softer? Or your stress goes up, right? That's what any one of us would do. But when we know someone is autistic or has an intellectual disability or PTSD or a mental illness, all of a sudden those behaviors, those responses that all of you would do become abnormal, maladaptive, a problem, what's wrong with them. We start labeling those behaviors as something odd when you just admitted those would be the same things that you do. Even if I am using this volume and tone of voice, somebody might be perceiving this volume and tone with more intensity than someone else. And that's just human variability. People who identify as neurodivergent, they often experience things differently than they will experience things differently than you. And they may perceive that same sensation with greater intensity. And so their response is going to be the same response as yours. Cover your ears, retreat, please be quiet. Any number of those things. Or if sometimes they can't express their displeasure verbally, or they can't tell you to please be quiet, they might start being anxious and start vocalizing and expressing some distress sound, like, ah. But then we call that odd when they're just trying to express to you in ways other than words that I don't like this, right? So that's what we would all do. Now, what if I spoke like this for the entire presentation, and I want you to attend really well to everything that I say? What are you going to do? You fall asleep. That's a good one. I should put that in my slide. Right? But tune out, ignore, or you'd be like, what is he saying? Like, you start to really focus. What is he saying? Right? And because you're trying to focus so much, you tend to tune other things out. Or you're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's supposed to happen. And then your anxiety starts to rise. Those are the responses that any one of you might exhibit under those same conditions. But when we know someone who is autistic or has an intellectual disability and they show those same behaviors, we start to label these behaviors as odd, maladaptive, or problem. When it's the exact same response that you would show under the same conditions. They're not getting the information, so they're trying to figure out what is the information that's going on, right? So a lot of people think sensory friendly is about making everything soft. And that's just not true. So as you just heard, some people need more sound, some people need less sound. And there's this variations every variation in between. But there is this misconception that sensory friendly means everything has to soften. At the Kennedy Center, we did sensory friendly Blue Man Group. And I've had people say to me, isn't that an oxymoron? How can you do a sensory friendly Blue Man Group? Well, I just described that some people in the neurodivergent community need more sound. And as an arts community, we actually have not been addressing this. They haven't had opportunities because everything is soft, and they're like, I need more sound. And if I go to these soft experiences, I'm just like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on, because they need more sound. So interesting, at this performance, Blue Man Group, it was about a 3-week run at Kennedy Center. And this was the highest ticketed sale show of the entire run. Even among the regular public performances, because there was a community out there that no one was addressing or supporting. And they saw this opportunity and they're like, let's go. I was in the lobby for most of this performance because I saw the show and I'm just like, oh, I don't get it. It's not my thing. I'll stay in the lobby. I'll be the lobby support. We gave out about 75 headphones. And then as the audience was responding, I personally only saw 2 people leave the theater because it was just too overwhelming. But that theater was packed, and only 2 people that I noticed left because it was just too much. But then the Kennedy Center, with their customer service, said, we understand. Would you like to come to a different show that is more aligned with your preference? Right? So sensory friendly doesn't have to be everything soft and fuzzy, right? Blue Man Group is an example that we need to diversify what sensory friendly means if you understand this high intensity, low intensity. So movement sensation. What's movement? Movement is actually gravity. What is gravity? The sense of falling down. So apply the under and over intensity phenomena to this idea of falling down. So what would you do, or what do you do when it feels like you're falling down? Stiffen your body, you move a little slower, or you look for things that are going to give you stability, and you walk along furniture or other objects just to give you that sense of stability. Because any movement you do, even if you turn your head, I feel a little bit of weight shift on the ball of my foot just by turning my head. That sensation is over intense. And so I feel like I'm going to fall down. So house staff, right? Show's going to start, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Okay, everybody, get in the house. Let's get to your seats. Follow me. Your seat's over here. Come on, let's go, right? Because your job is to get everybody in the house. But what if it's somebody who has this over intense gravity and they're like, and they're moving slower because they have this sense of falling down. But the voice that's coming out of the house staff is, come on, let's go. Let's, like, even though you're being very, very polite, there is this little undertone of like, come on, let's go, right? Versus, follow me to your seat. Your seat's this way. And you allow people to be who they are, because they may feel gravity with more intensity than other people. Right? So one of the qualities of sensory friendly is that people can go in and out of the theater as much as they want. They're going to move at their own pace, and we allow for those preferences. Now let's think about, so gravity, over intense gravity, right? They might move slower, they're gonna focus, they're gonna look to stabilize. They also may get anxious because they know that they are not meeting the social norm of getting in their seat just like everybody else, right? And again, just that stress alone, increases anxiety. Now I want you to think about under intensity. Someone who's under intense gravity. They don't feel gravity like everybody else. So when food is bland, when food is under intense, what do we do? We're in Texas, by the way. Spice it up. You increase the sensation because the person isn't feeling the sensation at the same intensity as other people feel it. So how do you increase the sensation of moving? By moving. You're trying to get the sensation of gravity underneath your feet, or somehow you're trying to get more sensation so that you can feel like you understand space. Do you know what we often call that behavior? We often call that behavior hyperactive. Is the person hyperactive, or is the person really trying to get a sense of space? And they're trying to find gravity more. Just like when your food is bland, spice it up. You increase the sensation, right? Many times, that's what the neurodivergent person is also doing, right? So every theater is different. You know, obviously, you can't let people just be running around all over the place. There's safety reasons, there's steps, there's all those things. Each venue is going to be different on how you manage that. You can just have people that can be natural sort of, hi, welcome, and you know, just if someone's sort of naturally in the middle of the stairs, someone's not going to bump into you. They might bump into you, but that's going to be a cue. Like, oh, I bumped into somebody. I might need to slow down, right? Or if you're up in the balcony, depending on the grade of the balcony, right? You know, that can pose some safety issues if people are running really fast. So each strategy or the way that each venue is going to deal with that is going to be very different because the strategies that are used down here are going to be different than the strategies used up there, right? And those are dialogues that you have with the house staff has that dialogue with the management, with the community. Knowing who that community is, which is why I say it's all based in relationship, because they will often tell you what those strategies are. Rather than us presuming what the strategy is or what they need, we just ask them, so what do you think? How should we, you know, do you have suggestions on how this can work? And then they'll more than happy tell you what those strategies are. So under intensity, they're trying to get grounded. So they might seek more information, they might move more, with more speed, with more force, they might touch more things, and then just the sense that they can't get grounded, so that can also increase a sense of anxiety. So I simplified it way too much. It's not that simple. But I simplified it just to give you the examples. It's not that simple. Just because someone experiences sound with overintensity doesn't mean they experience sound with overintensity with everything. That overintense sound can actually fluctuate throughout the day. It can even fluctuate within the hour. And so understanding this modulation helps you as a volunteer or as a house staff to be attuned to that. And that people may be at different points, at different times, even throughout the next hour. And your knowledge of that just helps you prepare on how you're going to respond and what kind of support you might provide that person. So, oops, it's moving when I'm not touching it, and then it's not moving when I am touching it. So that last point there was that it really is based on the context. And so as volunteers and as house staff, being aware of what the context is going on. Is there more crowds in the space, or is there less crowds in the space? Is there space for the person to move a little bit more in the lobby versus in a smaller, narrower space? And you can make those suggestions. Oh, you know, here's some space over here. Would you like to come over here? You know, come into this space. There's more room. You know, or would you like to have a seat right here? You know, if you're looking for stability. So everyone is different. The neurodivergent community, studies have shown about 80% of the neurodivergent community has this sensory processing dysfunction. But that means 20% don't. So again, we can't presume that everybody is experiencing these sensory processing differences. And you know, that really means it's up to you to really pay attention to that. right? And not presume that just because someone is responding in a certain way, that it means something, right? They may just be responding slow because they had a slow day and they're tired. It's at the end of the day. You're going to an 8 o'clock performance, and I know I walk a little sluggishly at 8 o'clock performance. That's why I tend to go to matinees these days now. So I think understanding the sensory processing really equips you and empowers you to provide those different supports and options to the visitor. So takeaway number 2, everyone perceives and responds differently to the same sensation, and do not assume other people experience the world in the same way that you do. But it's more complex than that. It's not just about sensory. How do we gather information about the world? Part of it is through our sensations, but other parts are from past experiences. And as I described earlier, the disability community has a plethora of negative experiences. So those emotions, that past knowledge, is going to influence their interpretation of what's happening. And when they enter a space that is unfamiliar, and they see an usher or a house staff with a uniform on, and it gives them the sense that, oh, it's formal, it's like security, it's people who wear suits or special, special costumes, they're gonna scold me, right? Because that's their past experience, right? So this is a little bit more complex than just the sensory. It really involves so many other things in how that person interprets that experience. So we have to be aware of that. So it's more than just sensory. It's also cognitive. What is their knowledge from past experiences, right? It's emotional, right? What were those past associations? Was it a good experience? Was it a bad experience? At the Kennedy Center, before we really got this work going, we had a situation where this young girl was getting a little overwhelmed, and you could see her tearing up. She was about 10 years old. And the usher went to her and said, "You're a big girl, you shouldn't be crying." And it took a really long time to get her comfortable again just to come to the Kennedy Center, just from that incident alone, because it created such a negative emotional association for her. So emotions are important. Culture. So this is a little bit of a newer dialogue that is happening in the arts industry. I come from Washington, D.C., and I've lived in Philadelphia for about 30 years. And I work with Spanish and Mandarin-speaking communities. And they're like, why would I go to the Kennedy Center? There's nothing there for me. The stories don't represent me. You can make it as accessible as you want. There's no cultural relevance for me. So accessibility and inclusion, while we're talking about disability inclusion, it really is about who these people are, right? And we can't only be presenting the same things over and over again, because you're not going to build a new audience if you do. And so many of these places are really thinking about that. They're diversifying their repertoire. It's not just English speaking. The deaf community often tells us, even though we have ASL interpreters and captions, the deaf community often says, I don't want to go to hearing theater. Why do I want to go to hearing theater about other people that don't represent me and who don't welcome me into their world? Why would I want to go see that theater? What I want to see is deaf theater, or theater that represents my life. And we're starting to hear that from culturally diverse communities, that if these organizations in our communities are getting public tax dollars, they need to represent all of us. So in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C., where I've done a lot of work, that conversation is happening more and more. And arts organizations are really thinking about how they are diversifying their repertoire. In a city like Philadelphia or Washington, D.C., I think Philadelphia is maybe 55% majority African American Black. Washington, D.C., I think it's even greater. What do you think is being presented? Right? Washington, D.C. has a majority African American Black community. We can't get them there. Right? And then when we talk about, I said, the disabled community, when you add race, income, education, everything gets worse. So we have to really start thinking about what inclusion really means. And then social. As I said earlier, the most important thing that I hear from people who identify as neurodivergent is they want to be connected to other people. Regardless of the sensory issues and things like that, they want to be connected to other people. And there are so few opportunities to belong to a community or to be connected to a community or connected to other people and develop those relationships. So the most important thing about sensory friendly is that it's social. And so we try to create these positive sensory, cognitive, emotional, cultural, and social associations to increase that exposure and those experiences so that they will come back. You want them to come back to the Hobby Center. That's what you want. But there's all these things that, because of their past experiences, they're a little bit hesitant. So as I've been talking this week with some of the staff here in the administration, it's more than just doing a sensory-friendly show. It's about that relationship building, and what are you doing about building those relationships? And it means that it's sensory, cognitive, emotional, cultural, and social. So sensory is a misnomer, even though we call them sensory inclusive, sensory friendly, because it's more than that. So what are some things that we do? A lot of places think the things that I'm going to talk about next, a lot of people think we have to do those things. And I'm here to tell you, you don't. It really depends. And part of how we need to employ these strategies is that these strategies are all about choices and autonomy for people to self-select into that strategy. The first thing is that the art is the art. And there are some places that think that sensory-friendly performances, that we change something up here. We change the lights, we change the voice of the actors, we change something up here. And I say, no, what you change is from here all the way back to the parking lot. And you have a whole lot more control over that as audience services. So this is what accessibility for the neurodivergent community is. It starts here and it goes to the parking lot, right? But there are places that are trying to change what's happening up here. What I say when you do that is that you're creating special art for special people. And the person isn't experiencing the art as the creator intended it to be experienced. Because then it's something different. The disabled person is getting something different than the rest of the public is getting, right? And I just have a different philosophy around that. So we don't change the art. We try to keep the integrity of the art as the creator intended it. Or here's another solution. We start to create art and produce art in a different way with disabled representation on the stage. Or to start to embed these sensory inclusive principles up here as part of the show. And there are companies and there are actors, performers, and disabled actors and performers that are starting to do that. And that's starting to happen more and more with more advocacy and more places like the Hobby and other places around the country that are really embracing the nurturing of disabled artists. I know fidgets are a big thing. but it really is about choice. I've been to some places where the volunteer or the house staff is standing at the front door and they're just passing out, forcing fidgets on everybody, right? You could just stand there. Would you like one? Yes or no. Would you like a fidget? It's just an option rather than forcing it, because not everybody needs a fidget and not everybody wants a fidget. I've been to shows where the fidgets were forced onto everybody, and at the end of the show, the house staff has to go through the house and start collecting fidgets underneath the seats. So make these choices. You also don't have to designate a specific quiet area. Sometimes you do. During intermission time, it might be important to have a designated quiet area. But once that performance starts, describe the lobby to me. It's quiet. So you don't necessarily need to create a separate room that separates them from the theater, right? The lobby is part of an extension of the theater. And many places, what they'll do is they'll put a video feed of what's happening on stage in the lobby, so they're still connected, right? So many places will create these separate rooms, but you may not have to. Intermission might be something, a time where that separate room might be needed because the lobbies get really crowded, but you don't always have to have a designated quiet area. And sometimes during intermission, where is the quiet place? It's right here, right? So you can find these quiet places many times, just naturally they exist, right? Rather than creating a separate room to separate people away from other things. And it just depends, it all depends. Oh, I need to go back. Another common strategy is that you increase the lights. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I think in this theater, you probably don't, because the lights from the stage are going to cast all the way out to the back, and it provides enough illumination for safety or visual orientation. Probably in the other hall, it's big, and the light doesn't necessarily cast all the way back. And so you might need to increase lighting for visual orientation or safety for a disabled person. So it really all depends. So you don't always have to increase the lights. Sound, right? The over-intense, the under-intense, Blue Man Group. You don't always have to increase sounds. There's lots of strategies from here back that can be done. Headphones. I've seen people stand at the door and watch the show the entire time for 2 hours. They just stand at the door because coming inside the house, it's just too loud and it's too intense. And so are people allowed to stand by the door and watch the show from the door? So there's lots of things that can be done from here back to the parking lot rather than changing something up here. Or what I've seen in some theaters, they can maybe cut this speaker. And so this area, the sound intensity might be a little bit less, right? Depending on where the other speakers are, I've seen theaters do that. They'll cut that speaker or lower that speaker. And so there's variations within the house, and then people find their own sweet spot where they want to sit that is based on their preference. Oops, forgot one more thing. This last point, another misperception is that you can't do blackouts because people get scared in blackouts. How long are blackouts? Maybe 30 seconds? Like you wouldn't have a 5-minute, 10-minute blackout. That's kind of weird in theater, right? So the strategy that we often use is we just let the person know. In Act 2, at the beginning, there's going to be about 30 seconds where the theater's going to go entirely dark. And the person's like, oh, okay, thanks for letting me know. And they start figuring out how they're going to manage through those 30 seconds. Right? And sometimes that's all you need. Right? So that's why I say that these strategies, it's not a checklist that you have to do it, but many places think that you have to do all these things. You have to lower the sounds, you can't do blackouts, you have to increase the lights. It really depends on the show, it depends on the theater, it depends on so many things. So generally, these strategies are what we call relaxed rules. In sensory friendly, we generally allow talking. We call it the no shush zone. You want people to stay connected to what's happening on stage. And all of us have done this. We're watching television at home. Our partner is sitting next to us. 15 seconds go by and your just thought goes somewhere else. What am I going to make for dinner? I'm hungry. Whatever it is, that 15 seconds, your mind just goes somewhere else. And you missed what was happening on the television. What do? What just happened? What did he just say? Right? Or rewind it, right? You can't rewind stage, right? But you can get reoriented by asking the person sitting next to you, and what's going on stage? When did that person come out? What did they just say? It's the exact same thing. And it keeps people connected to what's happening up here, which is what we want to happen, right? We allow communication devices. People will communicate through different means. They might use special devices, they might use phones, they might use tablets, and that's allowed. Sometimes we'll have visual information for people to use as they are going through the show, as long as the person isn't doing this, right? And the house staff, they know, and they already have scripts on how they engage with audience members when someone's doing this, right? And as long, that's a pretty common rule in theater, but otherwise, communication devices are allowed. I already talked about headphones, earplugs. Sometimes you need the sound and light adjustments. Allowing people to change their seats. Like I said, with the soundscape of the house. If there's space to move around, people can find their own sweet spot. If the house is completely full, that's going to be a challenge. And sometimes you just allow people to move and stand in different places on the side aisles or in the back aisles. Those are really common strategies for sensory friendly. Some theaters will actually block and hold open seats to allow for some of that movement. But that depends on lots of different factors, whether a theater decides to do that or not. Allowing people to go in and out of the theater. Maybe you need a quiet space, maybe you don't. The fidgets, the artifacts, lobby feeds. I also suggest that with shows that if it's possible, based on copyright, can there be previews, videos and previews, soundtracks of the show so that someone can start to get a sense of what the experience is going to be like before they're actually here. And so they can start to think about what their own strategies are going to be as they experience the theater. As I said, the one thing that I hear from individuals who identify as neurodivergent, it's about social connectedness, even social connectedness with the house staff. That they're welcoming, the person feels that you want them here and that you're inviting them into the space. They want this sense of belonging. But oftentimes we have our own ideas about what disability is or isn't, or what somebody can or cannot do. And we always presume competence, that they can do whatever they choose to do. Right? But we often look at a disabled person as, oh, they can't do, right? And so just to change that a little bit, change that attitude, change that perception, is that we just meet them where they are and we accept them as they are. And they're gonna present themselves to us, right? And you're gonna know, you have knowledge on how you can move fluidly through that experience with them, right? Rather than putting our own sense of, oh, that person is walking slow, so maybe I need to help them, right? Maybe you don't need to help them, you just have to be patient. right? And give them the space to respond in the time that they respond. So in my view, sensory friendly, as I said, it's a misnomer. The main objective with sensory friendly is social, which means if you're the front-facing staff or volunteers, you're probably one of the most important people in this entire experience for the audience member. And I've already talked about cultural and linguistic diversity. So it really is about changing the context and the environment. It's not about changing the person or fixing the person or expecting the person to be somebody that they're not. There's nothing that you have to do, and it really depends on the context, and it depends on the theater, the way it's set up. It depends on so many different factors, and really just allowing people to be who they are. We also try to create different entry points because people are going to experience theater in different ways. We might assume that theater is mostly visual and auditory, but other people might experience theater from movement or some other sense that that's how they gather information. Or we will give them information so they can start thinking about, this is what we call priming. We might provide them with information so that they can start thinking about what this experience is going to be like. So creating those different entry points allows people to be who they are and engage in a means other than the way that you might engage. And I have an example here from the Washington National Opera in Washington, D.C. It's the opera Hansel and Gretel. So there was this young girl who was in the audience, and she was sitting in her chair, and she was moving about, and she was vocalizing because there was something in her body sensations that was telling her, like, this is uncomfortable. And the mom was like, sit down, shh, be quiet, sit down, shh, 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 sit down. The house staff came up to the mom and said, it's okay, this is an accessible space. If she needs to get up and do something, she's allowed to do that. And the mom looks at the usher like, really? Like, you're gonna let my daughter get up? They're like, yes, it's fine. We're a welcoming space. So this is what the young girl does. She was around 13 or 14 years old. She gets up and she does this. And what we started to notice is that when the performers move stage right, she moves stage right. When the performers move stage left, she moves stage left. And then this scene happens. If you Hansel and Gretel are in the forest and they fall asleep, and this is what the girl does. That moment, her mom lost it. And at that moment, we realized that she was connected to the show. If she had to sit in her chair and attend to all those body signals that were telling her, get up and move, get up and move, but her mom was telling her, sit down and be quiet, her body signals were telling her something different, she would not have been attending the show at all. And that was her way through a different entry point to stay connected to the show. The other thing that was very interesting about that show, at the end of the show, the performers backstage, they were saying they were watching this whole thing unfold. And they were working so hard to keep her connected with them. And when this scene came up and this happened, the performers said they almost lost it on stage. And they said it was probably one of the most impactful experiences as a performer that they've ever had, that they were that connected to an audience member. That's what you want in theater, and that's what performers always say to us, is that we want to be connected to you. And oftentimes they say, right, in a blank theater, they don't see because it's too dark, they don't get the connections with people, and they say they're just up here doing their thing, right? They're marking it in their head and they're doing their thing and they hope they hit their marks, but they aren't always necessarily connected to you. And they said, as a performer, that's what we strive for. And they said they literally were losing it on stage. And they said they had to work so hard to stay on their marks and to think so hard to keep her connected to them. And they said it was one of the best experiences they've ever had as a performer. There's this other idea that we call priming, and it's about providing information beforehand prior to the real-time experience. It allows for future thought. It allows people to absorb information at their own pace, and they can begin to start thinking about what that experience is and how might they respond in that moment. Providing that information provides a degree of consistency, familiarity, and predictability. There's short narratives. Sometimes they're called pre-visit stories, know before you go guides. Some people call them K-bugs, know before you go. And they're short scripts that are describing a situation. And oftentimes these short scripts, we tend to try and keep them descriptive rather than prescriptive. Prescriptive meaning you're assigning an emotion or an action. Sometimes we'll assign an action, like, if you want to leave the theater, you're allowed to leave the theater. That's a prescription, right? But generally what we try to do is we try to keep it to just describing. There's going to be actors on stage. There's going to be music. There's going to be dancers. The music is going to get loud at certain points. The music is going to go softer at certain points. So we're just describing the situations. Here's some examples. Here's one that is in a schedule format, describing the sequence of how things might happen in that experience. That you arrive at the theater, you give your tickets to the usher, you're in the lobby, you may need to use the restroom. When the show is over, you leave the theater. This one on here on your right is from a ballet school, and it's the Nutcracker, and there's dancers coming on and off the stage fairly quickly, and just keeping people connected to, oh, now these dancers are on, and then these dancers are going to come next. So we'll write these social narratives in that format sometimes. This one is from a theater in New Jersey, and it's just describing the general theater experience. You go into the lobby, you give your ticket to the usher, they might scan it, and then when you walk into the house, into the theater, you get a program. And these can be as general or as specific as you want them to be. This one, the actors play multiple characters, and so that can be confusing. It's like, well, I just saw them doing that, and now they're doing this, and are they the same person? And I'm not sure. And then that might get a little confusing and distracting, and then you lose your focus on the show. So we have a social narrative that is describing one actor and the two characters that they're portraying on the stage, just so they have some idea of that. This one on your right, where it says horses, is that actors come on and they are acting like horses. You may not know what they're doing, but they're acting like horses. Or it could even be more abstract than acting like horses. Or, I missed that. There was a slide that I think I took out, but the actors, they were portraying a storm, right? And they might be moving a certain way, and you might not be sure, why are they moving that way? So we're saying the actors are portraying a storm. Or in this one show, an actor was showing how a vase was made, right? And doing a dance, and you might not know, why are they doing that dance, or what is that dance for? And so we just are giving some cue points so that the person can stay connected. We also don't stay away from important topics, as you see up here. And these shows, Sweat, The Few, The Color Purple, they all had very heavy topics. And right, if you might be surprised by some of these topics. And so we're just letting them know, this is the topic in the show. Racism, homophobia, rape, right? We're just letting them know, we're not giving away the plot. We're just saying, here's topics that are going to be introduced in the show. Language, racist language might be used in the show. And so the person is prepared. So it doesn't sort of derail them in their focus of attending and staying connected to the show. And we're finding, particularly as we are doing more and more presentations for adults, we're finding we're doing more and more of this. because these are the types of shows that they are asked that they want to experience. So priming is part of everyday life. All of you do it every single day, right? When you go to a restaurant that you've never been to, what do? You look it up. Yelp, whatever it is you're looking up. When you're going to a place or a vacation that you've never been to, you look it up. What are the things to do? How do I get there? We do priming all the time in everyday life. And so we're just doing the same thing for the neurodivergent community in coming to the theater. We still keep that anticipation. We don't give the plots away because that is the magic and mystery of theater, right? So we're just describing things that might happen. And that is supporting individual needs. That's why it's about inclusion, not just access. Access is opportunity. Inclusion is meaning and belonging. And so we need to aspire to support individual needs, allow for that flexible environment and that fluidity of how the person is going to respond in those moments, and transfer as much autonomy over to them as much as they can, and that they have the choices of how they're going to experience theater. If they want to sit in the back, they're allowed to sit in the back. If they need to move up forward because they need more sound, they can move forward, but they're given those choices. And then the organization. This really has to be an entire organizational initiative, and it starts with social skills training for staff. And this social skills training provides foundational knowledge so you understand that fluidity and that flexibility. Another thing that's really important is that in the organization, it has to be top to bottom. It can't just be you, which is usually most places that I work with, it's mostly you, rather than the CEO or other people. Hobby is actually different, because in my meetings leading up to this week that I'm here, Mark, CEO, he's been in those meetings thinking about what this means to have this kind of training and what this means in the future. That's really unusual. I've worked and advised over 120 organizations, and I can tell you there's only 2 organizations where the CEO is in that conversation. 2 out of 120. So that means 118, I'm mostly just talking to you. So it's really important that the entire organization is behind this, because yes, we're talking about sensory friendly and preparing for sensory friendly performance, but really, if you hear my real message, we're talking about changing the way that society engages with the disability community. And that's not going to happen next week, next year. This is going to be decades in the making. But if we start to develop our capacities for understanding this, hopefully we're going to start moving that needle for every underserved and marginalized community, because we understand accessibility, we understand inclusion a little bit better as an entire society. And that's what this last bullet point means, is that all of you are modeling for the public, because there may be people here who have never had exposure to people with disabilities. And when they see your response, when somebody is vocalizing because they are expressing joy, rather than doing the stare, you as the house staff or volunteers, you're just like, that's cool. And that person who hasn't had exposure to person with disability are gonna look at like, is the house staff gonna do anything? They're not, they're just chilling out. And then all of a sudden they start realizing, oh, this must be okay. And that we can be a little bit more humanistic in how we see other people, because the staff here is humanistic in how they see other people. So you're modeling for the public what it means to be inclusive. Whoops. So that first bullet point was resist the urge to stare, right? Because you understand the variability in responses, and that's just the ways that people respond. Just like you responded to loud sounds or soft sounds, they're doing the same thing. They just might be perceiving it and interpreting it differently than you, right? But their response is exactly the same response that you might have. I always say try to pair gestures and voice. So rather than, oh, go sit over there, right? Using those vague, ambiguous terms are kind of like, what do you mean go sit over there? What does that mean, right? But you say, come sit in this chair right here, come sit in this chair. And you're pairing your voice with this chair, and that just gives more reinforcing language and understanding of what it is that you're trying to communicate across, right? Rather than, oh, your chair's up in front. And the person's like, okay, which one up in front? Versus your chair is right here, right? And the person knows exactly what you are referring to. Give choices if you can give choices. Like the fidget, don't just push the fidgets on them. Like, would you like a fidget? Right? Give them a choice. Speak directly to the person. So, what does she want? Versus, what would you like? Right? You may be non-speaking, or you may have difficulty understanding what I'm saying, but my intent is to direct it at you. So why would I ask you what she wants? Right? She may not be able to respond to me, but then a caregiver, a family member is probably going to be in the environment, and those dynamics are going to be sorted out. But you, as the person who is making the request, you're making the request of this person, not having this person be this intermediary. It may end up that way, but let those dynamics evolve. And so this person knows that you see them as a person, as an independent person. Avoid using it, this, that, there. Avoid assigning emotion, and then the individual response time. Follow me to your chair. Your chair is over here. So allowing people those individual response times, because they're going to respond differently. They're not going to maybe move as fast as you want them to. Right? So the staff training, like today, is really important because it gives you knowledge. It helps you understand the values of why this is important. It gives you some strategies on how you might respond and how you might enact, and that just empowers you to be able to move through the fluidity of these experiences. It's not just up to one person, it's up to all of us and all of you. It's the whole organization. It's not just Robin in the Education and Engagement Office that is making this happen. It really is everybody in this organization. And it builds trust, public modeling, and you're providing that public education to the whole Houston community, not just the hobby community. You're providing that public education to the Houston community. So it's the entire organization that advocates for disability, accessibility, and inclusion, from the top to the bottom. And not only is it about visitor services or audience services, it's also thinking about how the disabled individual is engaging in society. Coming to the theater is one way that we engage, right? But being involved in the arts, as we already saw, if someone is involved in the arts in childhood or through youth, that trajectory just continues into adulthood. So are we creating opportunities for art making or arts education being inclusive? Are we nurturing disabled artists so that that representation is seen, which then will bring people into the audience to see their stories being told on the stage? And then, how do we include them in the productive lives of our society? Are we creating opportunities for hiring and employment for the disabled individual? And so organizations that are starting to think about access and inclusion, it's not just about being an audience member. It really is about everything that the organization does is inclusive. You can't just pick and choose inclusion. And I have this video here I'd like to share.
joy to be able to come to the Hobby Center to see Aladdin, and it's been awesome.
We are so grateful to be here today with the Hobby Center Foundation in order to have a day out with our family. We normally don't get out very often and in a place where people can accept us.
This is our third performance for special needs families. We came and saw the Rockettes and we saw the Lion King, and Matthew is so excited, and we always see a lot of friends here, and he knows exactly what's going on and that this is a special performance for him and his friends.
By the time we got into the garage, to keeping the kids calm, because sometimes that's very scary too with all the echoes in the garage, to coming here and giving them sensory-friendly items. Everyone's been very, very nice and supportive, and you could just tell the staff of Aladdin really wants to be here to perform for these kids. You could just see it in their faces.
Today has been phenomenal. My daughter was able to sit through the play. She had something in her hands. No one minded if she moved back and forth. My younger son is not as verbal, but he was able to see the orchestra and the cello, and he lit up, and the cello player spoke to him. The cast has been great. The staff has been great. Everyone has really just showed us warmth, and everything that can be possibly done, everyone has done for us and just made us feel welcomed and just so overly excited to be here.
My daughter really enjoyed it. The noise level I feel like was great. You know, looking at her, she didn't get overexcited. She was very attentive.
Everybody was so accommodating. There was so much helpful staff for all the people that had issues with getting in and seating. The lighting was wonderful, the presentation, and of course the performance was outstanding.
We don't get to do stuff like this too often because we do have kids that have meltdowns and things, so most theaters don't want us to come there. So it was great to be able to experience this as a family with our kids. I loved all the sensory areas and the different quiet areas that you had for the kids so that if they were overwhelmed, you did have a place that they could go calm down. Everybody just greeted us with a friendly face. Everybody was kind. They all offered assistance.
Everybody was so nice. You can kind of tell when somebody's told to be nice because it's their job to be nice, but today they were just nice because they were nice.
Many of these families would never have the opportunity to experience something this wonderful, especially as a family unit. Thank you so much, Hobby Center. Thank you, Hobby Foundation, and thank you, Disney, for making this possible for this very underserved and very appreciative audience.
We want to thank the Hobby Center Foundation for hosting this. As a parent of a special needs, you can't imagine what it means to us. My son is a nonverbal autistic, but if he could talk, he would say thank you to those that were responsible for this.
It's kind of a wish come true. It's very difficult for somebody like him to be able to experience this facet of life.
Would you like to come back? Yes, we definitely would.
Hobby Center, thank you so much for sponsoring this. It really means a lot to me and my family.
I love this! It's amazing! Thank you,
So, as I said, this is more than access. This really is about inclusion. It's about creating these opportunities, but more importantly, it's about creating meaning and belonging for people who often don't get that experience. So, to sum up, it's about relationships. Remember that everybody perceives and responds differently to the same sensation. It's more than sensory. It's cognitive, it's emotional, it's cultural, it's social. We really try to preserve the integrity of the art, and sensory friendly is from the stage to the parking lot. Those priming, helping people prepare, that's a part of everything that we do, and that's what we're trying to build into sensory friendly. And it's about supporting individual needs. And the staff training is really important so you have the fluidity and flexibility to be able to engage with the neurodivergent community. And it's the entire organization that needs to advocate for disability, accessibility, and inclusion. So remember, imagine being who you are. Thank you. Any specific, we got like 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, if anyone has a question.
Yeah.
How do we know how to respond to the individual who come in? You had mentioned at first we have all these different perceptions and all these different things. For us, it's the first time that we've seen this.
Yeah. Yeah. So my takeaway point on that is, and that's why, I think that term sensory friendly is a little bit of a misnomer, because the thing that the neurodivergent person is really looking for is a social connectedness. So you just making a connection and being inviting and supportive, that's what they're looking for. Their family or their other people that they are with, they're going to know all those sensory needs. And they may communicate that to you, and you can say, oh, a quiet area is over here, right? But you don't necessarily have to know. I'm just telling you so that you are aware that these are the things that might be happening underneath. But the most important piece is social and that connectedness that you have with the audience member, making them feel like they belong. That hobby is their home. That's, I think, the major goal.